Now, to round things off for this video series, I'm going to tie up a few loose ends and add a few more bits of information for you. And the first one is to look at what are called procedural textures. Now here I have two identical blocks, each with the same material applied to it, and it's this material here. The pattern is Wood Floor 13 JPEG. Now, so far so good, but what I'm going to do is look at this procedural texture here, which right now is exactly the same, has the same image on it, which is why you're seeing this cube looking identical to that one. But I'm going to change the image to a procedure. Now everything changes. The image here changes, and the information here changes significantly. So what I've done is completely detach myself from the regular image type of material and go into the procedure, which is quite different. The default here is noise, but I need something different. I need to go down to wood, and in fact wood luxology. So I click on that, and my image here changes again. Looks kind of peculiar, but you'll see why this is so in a minute. Notice the settings here are quite significant. Notably, you can change the colors of the rings and the fillers. We can change a lot of different aspects of this. I'm going to leave them exactly as the defaults. I'm still on master units, which works well for this, but most important is mapping. For procedure materials, solid is the best option. Now, if I go and render this, let's start Luxology. I'm working in draft right now. And let's render. Now you see the difference. Here we see the standard plank wood image, and here we see the procedural texture. Entirely different. Notice how the grain laps around the corners and is matching on all of the sides. Matches reasonably well on this side, but it matches exceptionally well on this side. And that's the whole point of a procedural texture. Materials will be generated such that we have overlapping patterns in line as they should be. Now this is not absolute, but it does give a very different effect and a very precise effect sometimes. So that's what a procedural texture is, and sometimes you might want to use it in preference to just a standard image. There is still an image behind this. So in fact, you really have to start with an image of any sort really, and then apply the procedure, which changes the whole presentation of the material. And remember that once you're in procedure, you are now removed from the original base material that you selected first. What you might try is working with the bowl on your table and choosing marble and seeing what differences you can get out of the marble procedure versus the ones that you got out of the regular image pattern. So I'll leave that with you and we'll move on. Now I'm going to go back to my original table and want to mention a couple of things. You need to keep this table assembly available because we're going to use it in the next video series. So don't lose this and make sure it's as perfect as it can be for your purposes. And I want to save, in fact, the material and the palette files for use in the next video series in a different drawing. To do that successfully, we need to be in the material editor. Here's all our materials. And I need to go to Table and Local Materials and Convert to, and we're going to External V8 Tables and Palettes. So click on that and it'll ask you where to locate it. I'm locating it right there and we'll save it. So those files are now saved for external use later on. Now, this is a safer way of doing it than simply copying this drawing to a new drawing. Now next, one thing you might have noticed is that if you click on the heading of a palette like this one, you might not see the actual materials. It might look like this, which is a little peculiar. But if you right-click on the head of the palette file and click on Generate Preview, the sample icons there will now display the materials in that palette. Don't ask me why it doesn't do it automatically, it just doesn't. So that's one way around that. Now the next thing is when you are working with Luxology and you click on the image settings for the brightness multiplier, you might also take a look at some of the other available options in this box. Now we're not going to use them yet, but we will be using one or two of them later on. go through all of the possibilities here, and in fact, ideally go to the help files and do a search for the Luxology image settings, particularly if you will be needing higher-end photorealistic images. We've been using MicroStation's default patterns here for the materials, but you can create custom pattern and bump files actually quite easily. You'll have noticed that the pattern and bump files are actually JPEG files, which have mostly been created either from digital photographs or scanned photographs of real materials. An alternate method is to draw a pattern in MicroStation and make a screen capture of the pattern, using either a screen capture program or MicroStation's image capture tools that we looked at earlier. Keep in mind that the pattern you create will be repeated and scaled when you attach it as a material or a bump map. Your pattern should be as modular as possible. You can add your pattern and bump files to MicroStation's default material folder, but it's usually best to create a new folder specific to your needs. So we're advancing quite nicely. We've got to the point now of generating quite a good looking image, and we can proceed to the next stage, which is starting to look at larger projects and starting with interiors. And we'll be going back to that house drawing that you did earlier, which you should be able to retrieve, hopefully, easily.